What is up, you guys? I'm so glad to have you here with me today. I am talking all about boundaries. This episode is specifically about talking about boundaries between two-person adult relationships. We can talk about boundaries all day when it comes to time, social media, money, all sorts of things. I'm talking about specifically two-person adult relationships, how to set boundaries that way. I give you a 5-step how to, but really I think that the good stuff is really in the beginning, where I sort of talk about how what a boundary really is and how boundaries really go both ways, right? Because when you understand that, when you really get boundaries, when you kind of define that, then you don't need the how-to guide, and that's kind of the truth of it. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode. I hope you find it useful and helpful and all the things. Enjoy. Welcome to the Get Out of Your Head podcast, where we talk all about the stories that keep you stuck, blocked from manifesting what you really want, and away from your authentic life. I am your host, Sarah, from Spirit, Mind, Body. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. Today I am talking all about boundaries. I am super pumped for this episode. I think it's one that we all probably need, obviously. I think I say that every time. I also think I say that I have a lot to say on this topic. I hope I can condense it sort of into my usual 30-minute episode. But yeah, here we are. We'll see where this goes. So today I'm talking about boundaries. I'm specifically talking about two-person adult relationships. I wanted to define that because boundaries are something that we can apply to basically every aspect of our life. We can apply boundaries to our social media. We can apply boundaries to our job. No, I cannot take on that project, or no, I don't have time for that. We can apply boundaries to kids, to our money, channeling where we want our money to go. We can apply our boundaries to our free time commitments. How do we want to spend our time, protecting that time that we really want to spend it, and saying no to other things that sort of creep in. We can apply boundaries to our stuff, and how do we let somebody borrow our stuff or somebody use our stuff. There's a lot of different ways we can apply boundaries, but this episode is all about that two-person adult relationship. What I would say is that most of the time when we need to set boundaries, it's usually with the people who tend to be closest to us, right? So these are people like parents, spouses, or partners, very close friends, kids who have grown up if you're on the other side of that parent, if your kids are grown. These are the people who we have a hard time with, right? And it's sort of, I think, because it's a natural tendency to entangle our sense of self with somebody else. We sort of think we know better. The closer somebody is to us, the closer we identify with them. We see ourselves in them. And so when we think they're messing it up, we of course, we want the best for them, right? Especially if it's our kid, or if it's, a sibling or something like that, or a very close friend. We think if they're messing it up, we can see it from the outside. We've been there, done that. We have that firsthand experience. And so we think that we need to, tell them how to do it so that they don't make the same mistake we did, right? That's something that I hear all the time. I just don't want you to make the same mistake I did. But here's the thing. Boundaries are all about respecting somebody else's path. Equally respecting our own path. So let me paint a picture. If I'm having a hard time with boundaries, sometimes say maybe my husband comes home and he wants to kick his feet up and watch TV at the end of the day, and all I can focus on is the messy house and the food that needs to be cooked, and he's okay with the messy house and he's okay with ordering out. And instead of being okay, let's find a solution, a breach of boundaries would be if I'm mentally in his life saying, you need to be more motivated. You can't kick your feet up. You can't do this. You can't do that. You need to have my same priorities or my same values. That's a breach of boundaries. And I think that boundaries, like where I see people struggle with this, it usually goes both ways. If somebody's saying, I need you to respect my boundary, they have a really hard time respecting somebody else's boundary too. That's where it like doesn't work. And really, I think boundaries is not so much what you do on the external, it's more of an internal shift. And so really getting that, really understanding how boundaries show up and how they need to be applied to our lives. Once you get it internally, the rest of it will sort of fall into place. Now, with that said, I am going to share my quote unquote how to set boundaries. And so, but before I get into that, I thought that it would be helpful to define boundaries. And so I wrote out this definition, and this is the closest I can come. Of course, there's wiggle room and words will always miss the mark at some point, but this is what I've got. I am me and you are you. We respect each other's rights to learn our own lessons, make our own choices, and live our own lives. Our relationship and the things that we do should be mutually beneficial in the long run. I'm okay with whatever choices you make until they have a direct negative impact on me. Okay? And I understand that direct negative impact can be sort of like a gray area, but for the purposes of needing to move forward, because we could rehash that, at what point do you define that direct negative impact? Like that can be kind of tricky, but we have to move forward. And so we're just going to leave that for now. Maybe we can dive into that at a different point. So like I said, I think that our boundaries get breached because we have people that are really closest to us. We sort of project, we see ourselves in them. And so whatever they're doing, we think we know better. We think that we could sort of do it differently or do it better. And so we sort of offer this unsolicited advice, even if it's within our own heads. And what I would say is, like, if I'm offering unsolicited advice in my head and I'm like being critical about somebody else, usually it comes out very, very passive aggressive. That's sort of the face that it takes, but I'm in my own head about it. And I'm thinking to myself, he shouldn't be doing that. She should do this differently. She shouldn't be with that person. She's messing it up. I'm in my head. But here's the deal is if I'm in my head and I'm living somebody else's life for them, this is what Byron Katie says, and I love this. If I'm living somebody else's life for them, then who is living my life, right? If I'm deciding that I'm going to mentally tell my husband that he shouldn't be relaxing when I see him relaxing, I'm leaving myself mentally. I'm not working on myself. And I simultaneously sort of disrespect myself and my own path as I'm living somebody else's life. And now your ego will be like, well, I've got it figured out. I don't need help. He's the one that needs help. That's what your ego will say. But the truth is that you are on totally separate paths. His path is not your path, right? And I'm saying his, it could be hers, whatever, apply your person. We're on totally separate paths. And I don't know his story. I don't know everything about his story. And so how could I live somebody else's life for him? And I'm not moving in the direction of my path. If you take that path analogy, a breach of boundaries is when you like jump on somebody else's path and you're like, okay, I'm going to do that for them. You're jumping off your own path. You can only be on one path at a time, right? Okay. So I've been talking about, sort of offering unsolicited advice, whether it's within our own head or otherwise, or even if it's overt. But I want you guys to think about this in terms of energy exchange. When my boundaries are breached, it's like unwanted energy that sort of, permeates my field. And then vice versa, like it could be energy going in the other direction. And so if I have a hard time setting my boundaries, that energy exchange is like an open door, right? And that can show up in many, many ways in our physical world. And so it could be in the form of emotional support. Like, I don't want to set a boundary with somebody else because then they would cut me off emotionally. This is like the classic toxic narcissistic relationship where I feel, and I'm just going to say he, it could be she. I feel that he is supporting me emotionally. He validates me. He makes me feel good. And then in turn, I feel subconsciously indebted to him because I need that emotional support and that validation or that companionship or that positive attention. And so I become afraid, or I have a really hard time setting that boundary with them. It could be money or resources. So, for example, if I have a parent who is supporting me financially, maybe paying my cell phone bill or, my housing or whatever, then I feel indebted to them. And so I will take, okay, you can't be with that person, or you have to do this for your degree path, or you have to, follow this career path. Those are the other ways that boundaries can sort of be breached. I think something that was really helpful for me to learn, this was I'll just tell you a really quick story. I learned this, I got it. Those times when you just you can learn about it, but when you get it, this is when I got it. I was living at my parents' house, and I was right out of college, or maybe I was in college, and I was using their car, something like that. And they had asked me, okay, well, I need you to be home at this time. And I didn't, I was like, I've been in college, I'm going to stay out, And that was the time that I got it. I was so a breach of boundaries is sort of like using your parents' car. If you're going to use somebody else's stuff, you also owe them, you have to, you're using it within whatever context they determine. And so if we become more and more autonomous and more independent, then we don't have to ask somebody. You don't have to have their approval. And I'm talking about this in terms of a car and actual physical things, but this could also be emotional support or companionship. If I am okay being me, by the way, I'm not saying that we don't need emotional support or companionship, because we absolutely do. We absolutely need these things. I think that the point, though, is to become more and more independent, and then we can choose who we get that emotional support and companionship from, instead of the default people that show up in our life and we're like, oh, you said something nice about me, thanks, I appreciate that, and now I really needed that validation, and so now I'm indebted to you. Does that make sense? So different boundaries can show up in many, many different ways. I don't know if that analogy helped you or not with the car and my little story, but that's when I got it. Maybe you have a similar story or a similar time that you could think back, and then you can kind of apply it to your set of circumstances as well. And as a side note, I think that this is absolutely the importance of healing, the importance of coming more and more into ourselves, the importance of being able to face hard times or hard situations or our wounds or our traumas that we've inherited, right? Because those things are always going to be painful for us. They're always going to be a point of contention until we come face to face with it and we heal it. If we never come face to face with it, it will be a very difficult thing for us to deal with, and we will continue to lack self-trust that we can handle it on our own, or that we can handle it in a healthy way. And so we'll continue to give that power over to somebody else when they validate us, when they provide us that validation, or when they provide us that companionship. Okay, so this is sort of my how-to guide of how to set boundaries. I have 5 things for you, but I do come back to this idea that if you really get boundaries, if you kind of, in your mind's eye can see the breach of energy, you don't need this how-to guide. Everything will sort of be intuitive for you. So it's never a catch-all, but these are just some tips that I've come up with, things that I see that I think would be definitely helpful. So first thing is, do it at a time when you're not emotionally flooded. When my boundaries are breached, I rage. I get so angry because I see it as a total injustice, and my ego will immediately take over. And what my ego tells me is that that person needs to pay for what they've done. And so my reaction is, I'm cutting them off screw them, I don't care about them. You see yourself as totally separate, and you don't even see that other person as another person with probably a legitimate story and a valid reason for doing what they're doing. And so my suggestion is you can feel that way, definitely. Don't suppress your anger, but let it pass. Get to a point where it has passed so that you can sort of come into a place of understanding for both. Because here's the thing, boundaries are never for you to win and for somebody else to lose. They should always be mutually beneficial for each person involved so that we both can continue making our own decisions and following our own paths. When we set boundaries, if we're in a total ego state or if we're emotionally flooded or we're so angry, that thing that puts us in fight or flight, when we set boundaries, when we're in that state, it sort of usually turns into a power struggle. And I can't tell you how many times I personally have been in this situation with several different people in my life. I've learned this lesson over and over and over again, where I feel like my boundaries have been breached. I'm so angry. And then I set a boundary as a reaction. And the reaction isn't truly me setting a good boundary. It's a reaction to punish the other person for breaching my boundary so that they would learn a lesson so that they never do it again. Do you see the difference? When I set a boundary, a good boundary that will last, it is respectful. It comes from a place of understanding, and truly at the end of the day, it actually brings us closer together because now we have reached this place of mutual understanding. It doesn't push each other away. I think that might be one of the most common things I see when it comes to boundaries that doesn't work. It's that you're trying to set a boundary as a reaction to somebody else, and it's a big F you, and it's meant to punish the other person. Those kinds of boundaries aren't meant to last. They build up resentment, they build up anger, and you are bound to see that boundary be breached again and again and again. And so my question, when you're in that state is like, or maybe a question you could ask yourself is, would you like to win or do you want this boundary to be honored? And if you want the boundary to be honored, then you have to step back from that power struggle. What will probably happen, and this leads me to my second point, what will probably happen is you calm down, you're not emotionally flooded anymore, you're like, I gotta bring this up to this person. It's a hard conversation, and you're like, okay, is it that big of a deal? I don't really, because setting boundaries, sometimes gets pretty uncomfortable, especially because there's usually an emotional charge to it. Obviously, we wouldn't be setting a boundary if we didn't feel convicted that this boundary needed to be set. And so it can sort of be, it's close to our hearts, and it can sort of be very difficult. And so what sometimes will happen is that you'll be like, okay, my boundary has been breached. I'm pissed. I need to set this boundary. I need to talk to this other person. I need to lay it all out there, right? And then you calm down and it sort of blows over and you're like, well, it's not that bad. And think about the things that you're getting from that person. Like, especially you're like, is it worth it? If I set this boundary, is that going to piss them off? And then are they going to cut me off from, my resources or my companionship? Are we not going to be friends anymore? Like, that's sort of the underlying thought process that goes along. And so it is worth considering running through the alternative. What happens if you don't set that boundary? What happens if you don't have that conversation? That boundary is going to be breached again and again if you don't lay it all out there. And so remind yourself of that when you're considering, blowing it off. And what I will tell you is that if you go ahead and just blow it off and you think that it's unimportant to set that boundary with somebody, that issue is going to come back and find you again and again and again. And it's going to be in different faces. It's going to be in maybe even different people, but symbolically, like the energy behind it, the same thing happens over and over and over again, because the point to it is for you to become autonomous. It's for you to take your power back, to realize how powerful you are, that you don't need that thing from that other person, that no means no, that you have the right to say no, that you have the right to have your own boundaries honored. And so if it's not with that person, maybe it would be with that person, in a different time, in a different place, with a different issue at hand, or maybe it's going to be a new person, a new relationship, but the same thing will happen over and over and over again. If you find yourself saying, why does this always happen to me? Chances are it's a repeat cycle, and it's the universe presenting you with an opportunity to become more empowered, to do these hard things. If you don't like the universe, maybe it's your highest self, where it's all of this is kind of going on behind the scenes. And if you don't address it now, you're probably going to be addressing it later. That's not to say that if you don't feel like you can address it now, if you feel like that's a little too difficult, you know what? It's okay. You're going to have another opportunity, but eventually you're going to have to do it. Or I suppose I shouldn't say that. It is your path. You do whatever you want to, but it's going to keep coming up over and over and over again. So if you want to heal it, if you want to change it, then come back to that. Consider running through the alternative. What happens if I don't? This problem's going to find me. Do I really want to face it again? And so here are some questions you can ask yourself to figure out if you want to face it now or later. And here are the questions. What kind of person do you become when your boundaries are breached? Who in your life besides yourself faces these negative consequences of you letting your boundary being breached? If I'm angry at work because I'm overloaded or I'm overstressed because of all these projects that I keep saying yes to, guess who's impacted? My family. Either I'm staying late at the office, or I come home and I have nothing left to give. I just want to go to bed, or I pour myself heaping glasses of wine, or eat too much, or check out mentally. I'm not there. I'm not present for my family. Those are the people who suffer the consequences. Not to mention you're not showing up for you in the best way possible. If you want to live your own life, it's not respecting yourself to bring these things up to somebody who's breaching your boundaries. It's asking yourself who suffers. And at the end of the day, it's probably not the person on the other end. It's probably the people that you love the most. And so Brene Brown says, choose discomfort over resentment. I think that is a very good mantra to hold on to, because the thing is, when you're resentful, you're going to become the worst version of yourself. And usually it's around the people who are around you the most and the people that you love the most, and that's not fair to them. Okay, the third thing, and I think that this is a really helpful mind exercise to do, or maybe like journal. You can journal it out, I don't know. But this is very helpful to do. I use sort of like reverse empathy when I'm trying to set a boundary. I have faith that the other person, if put in my shoes, would understand where I'm coming from. And I think that like, it's sort of weird because energetically, if you're imagining like boundaries as this entanglement of energy, and we want to cut that off and have our own energy going our own ways, we also, in order to get there, we need to like sort of come back together, get on the same frequency by going through these mental exercises of like having empathy for each other, understanding each other's stories in order to make peace and then go our own paths. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, but that's like the way that I see it in my mind's eye. But I always have faith that, all that to say that I always have faith that the other person, if put in my shoes and understood my story, would want to do the exact same thing. Another way to frame it is, what would their highest self want your highest self to do? Understanding that, yes, we're living this physical life, but spiritually speaking, if that other person wanted truly the best for me, even though their ego can't see it, that the best for you is going to be you walking your own path, or being able to walk your own path and letting them do the same thing. It's best for them too. That reverse empathy is really helpful when it comes back to finding that mutual beneficiality. I don't even know if that's a word. That way that it's mutually beneficial to both of us. And maybe it's not even reverse empathy. Just use empathy in general. understand that they have the ability, if they were put in your shoes, to understand where you're coming from. But I think that using regular empathy is really helpful in this case as well, because when you put yourself in your shoes, you start to see things that it sort of diffuses the emotion, or that highly charged emotion out of it. That reaction tendency, it kind of diffuses that when we can put ourselves in somebody else's shoes. We start to see things as not malicious acts or attempts to control you, but simply as a product of, that's just a thing that they do. It's a product of their own pain. And when you see it like that, you sort of step down from that defensive posture, and you start to set boundaries from a place of connection rather than hatred or reaction, which, like I said, won't work. The boundaries that are set out of reaction or out of hate, those are not boundaries that are going to be maintained. It's too emotionally charged. If a boundary is set and you're doing it in a peaceful way, you'll see their discomfort as leading to their growth as well. Comfort rarely breeds growth. And this is kind of like a life lesson that I think that we all probably need, is that when you enter a place of discomfort, it pushes you to change something. And so, yes, having these conversations with somebody who's breached your boundaries is very difficult. But could you see that difficult conversation as ultimately good, because they're going to have the opportunity to grow as well? Okay. The fourth thing is that when you come to set your boundary, be vulnerable and speak your truth with compassion. If you have done step 3, if you've done the whole empathy piece, if you've tried to understand another person and you have faith that they can understand you, if they know your story, this is the next natural step. And so when you come at a place of total honesty, this is the way that it affects me. Drop into your heart, feel first, and share the rawness of your experience. This becomes now your thread of connection. This is how you both get on the same frequency and sort of disentangle yourself. So the truth is that if I tell you the struggle that I'm having, I'm saying, you did this to me, you breached my boundary, I didn't like that. If I'm focusing on the actual thing that happened, that may or may not be relatable, right? And especially because, like, somebody can always justify, well, I did this because of this, or it was for your best good, and they go in their own ego story. But if you get to the rawness of the experience and you say, that made me feel really disempowered, and I don't feel free to walk my own path, or whatever raw experience you're having, that vulnerable place, that's probably something that they can relate to as well. And so I would say, do not focus on the thing that actually happened, the actual physical parts of the problem. Focus on the internal state. What sort of dilemma does this present for you that they could probably relate to if they had the opportunity? And there's probably a lesson here in the way that we say, like the way that we express our feelings when we say, and that's a whole another topic for another thing, but our internal state is not saying, I feel like you disrespected me. No, that's still outside of you. I feel hurt. I feel angry. I feel disempowered. All of those things, like, it has nothing to do with you. Like, at the end of the day, your feelings don't have anything to do with the person. You know, if you could see it, you know, from like a symbolic point of view, it doesn't have anything to do with the person. It has to do with what is happening. And this is the state that you're in. And the state that you're in is empowering you to make a change. And so that's kind of the way that it shows up. Other things that you might want to say is something like, I feel very stressed. I feel overwhelmed. I feel, like I said, disempowered. All of those things would be good things to use, but that once it becomes a because statement, or I feel that you aren't listening to me, that's not your feeling. That's your interpretation. That's a story. Does that make sense? So, and then the fifth thing is that you need to accept that you are not responsible for their reaction. And this last point sort of leads us full circle. This is boundaries. This leads us back to that core piece. I am me and you are you, and we respect each other's life to live our own lives, learn our own lessons, and walk our own path. And so if somebody is angry at you for setting your boundary, then that's their right. That's okay. It has to be okay. That then becomes their path. That then becomes something that they can work through. Yes, we all want to have peace at the end of this. Yes, we all want that. But at the end of the day, like, if they're going to be angry about you setting a boundary, then that's not your fault. Because, and think about it this way, if you're setting a boundary with one person, if you say, I don't like it when you do this, or I can't do that for you, consider, is it possible that where one person could be angry, another person could be totally understanding and appreciative that you set that boundary? And so you can see that there's no objective reaction. There's no right reaction to have. Whatever reaction somebody has is a product of their own story, their own conditioning, their own past experiences, how they view the world, and it has really nothing to do with you, and that becomes their own path to walk. If they want to heal it, then that's up to them, but their healing is not your responsibility. You are responsible for yourself, walking your own path, and you need to let them do that. All that to say that I must respect their reaction in whatever way it shows up, even if I feel like it's unhealthy, even if I feel like there's a better way to do it. And so what you really could do at the end of this is say that if that reaction becomes anger, then you could say, I'm sorry, I can't let you yell at me like that. I can't let you talk to me like that. That makes me feel disempowered. That is not respectful to me. Or that makes me feel disrespected. That is, I suppose that's a thing, right? That's what I'm talking about, a direct impact on me. And if that happens, then I have the right and the ability to walk away. And, there are consequences, but at the end of the day, I think that all the consequences are for you to evolve, even if they're presented in a package that you don't necessarily want to unwrap. Okay, thank you guys so much for tuning in and joining me today. I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I will see you next time. If you enjoyed this episode, I would invite you to subscribe, share it with someone you know, and leave an honest rating or review. You can also connect with me through Instagram at spiritmind.body, through YouTube, or my website. Links to all of these can be found in the show notes below. This work is not easy and requires tremendous self-reflection, grit, and a willingness to be misunderstood, and for that, I honor every single one of you for showing up for your authentic self. Until next time.